The rain hammered relentlessly against the thin metal roof of Ethan Carter's trailer, the sound almost deafening as he sat at his small kitchen table, nursing a cup of cheap instant coffee. Outside, the world was a blur of gray, the kind of storm that made even the bravest souls think twice about stepping out. Maplewood, Illinois, wasn't known for its dramatic weather, but tonight felt different, as if nature itself had decided to unleash its fury. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, was already asleep in her bunk bed, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. He sighed, rubbing his temples, the weight of another long day pressing down on him like the heavy clouds above. His job at the local warehouse barely paid enough to cover rent and groceries, let alone the repairs the old trailer desperately needed. The heater sputtered occasionally, and the leak in the ceiling had worsened over the past week, but Ethan didn't have the energy to complain anymore. Life had taught him to take what came and keep moving forward. Just as he was about to stand up and check on Lily, a faint knock echoed through the trailer, startling him. It was soft yet insistent, almost drowned out by the storm raging outside. Frowning, Ethan set his mug down and walked cautiously toward the door. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour? Peering through the peephole, he saw a figure huddled under the dim porch light, drenched from head to toe. A young girl, no older than 16, stood there shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to ward off the cold. Her blonde hair clung to her face, and her designer jacket, soaked and muddy, was clearly not meant for such conditions. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Letting strangers into his home wasn't something he did lightly, especially with Lily sleeping just a few feet away. But there was something about the girl's posture, the way she seemed so utterly lost and vulnerable, that tugged at his heartstrings. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and cracked it open slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. The girl looked up, her blue eyes wide with desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." She explained haltingly that she had run away after an argument with her parents, though she avoided giving too many details. Her name was Emily, she said, and she just needed a place to stay for the night. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to turn her away. After all, he hardly knew her, and trusting people blindly wasn't something he could afford. Yet, as he studied her pale face and the exhaustion etched into every line of her body, he couldn't bring himself to shut the door. "All right," he said finally, stepping aside. "Come in before you catch your death out there." Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second before slipping inside, leaving wet footprints on the worn carpet. Ethan closed the door quickly, locking it behind them, and gestured for her to sit on the couch while he fetched a towel. As Emily dried herself off, Ethan busied himself making a pot of tea, his mind racing with questions. What kind of teenager ran away in the middle of a storm? Where were her parents? And why did she choose his trailer, of all places, to seek refuge? Despite his doubts, he pushed those thoughts aside for now, focusing instead on the immediate task of ensuring she was warm and dry. When he returned with 2 steaming mugs, Emily accepted hers gratefully, wrapping her hands around it as if drawing strength from its warmth. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds being the relentless drumming of rain and the occasional crackle of the ancient space heater in the corner. Finally, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Ethan broke the quiet. "You said you ran away," he began gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emily lowered her gaze, staring into her tea as if searching for answers in its depths. "It's complicated," she murmured after a pause. "My dad, he doesn't understand me. Neither does my mum. They care more about appearances than anything else." Ethan nodded slowly, sensing the pain behind her words. He knew what it was like to feel misunderstood, to carry burdens no one else could see. Still, something about her story didn't quite add up. Most teenagers who ran away didn't wear expensive jackets or gold lockets engraved with intricate designs, like the one dangling around her neck. He wanted to ask about it, but decided against it, figuring she'd share more when she was ready. Instead, he offered her a blanket and told her she could rest on the couch for the night. Emily thanked him quietly, her voice tinged with gratitude, and curled up under the blanket, her eyes closing almost instantly. Watching her drift off, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from ordinary. Something about her presence unsettled him, like the calm before a storm, and he found himself glancing at the locket again, wondering what secrets it might hold. Despite his unease, Ethan forced himself to focus on practical matters. He checked on Lily, who was still fast asleep, then turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the space heater to illuminate the room. As he lay down on his own creaky mattress, the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and sending chills down his spine. Sleep eluded him, his thoughts consumed by the mysterious girl sleeping mere feet away. Who was she really? Why had she chosen his home, of all places? And, most importantly, what would happen when morning came? Every time he closed his eyes, fragments of unanswered questions swirled in his mind, keeping him awake. At one point, he heard Emily shift on the couch, muttering something incoherent in her sleep. Was she dreaming? Or was she talking in her sleep, revealing clues to her true identity? The suspense gnawed at him, each passing minute stretching endlessly as the storm raged on outside. Hours passed, and eventually, the rain began to ease, the thunder fading into distant rumbles. Exhaustion finally caught up with Ethan, pulling him into a restless slumber. But even in his dreams, the image of Emily lingered, her golden locket gleaming faintly in the shadows. Little did he know, this seemingly random act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life and about himself. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in the blinds, casting long shadows across Ethan's modest trailer as morning arrived, bringing with it a sense of calm after the chaos of the previous night. Emily stirred on the couch, her blonde hair tousled, and her face still bearing traces of fatigue. But there was a softness to her expression now that hadn't been there before. Ethan, who had slept fitfully, was already awake, brewing a pot of coffee in the tiny kitchen area, while trying to piece together his thoughts about the strange girl who had appeared out of nowhere. He glanced over at her occasionally, noticing how she seemed to take in every detail of the cramped spaced and mismatched furniture. The faded wallpaper, the stack of bills sitting unopened on the counter. She didn't say anything at first, but there was a quiet curiosity in her eyes, as if she was studying a world entirely foreign to her own. When the coffee was ready, Ethan poured 2 mugs and handed one to Emily, his movements cautious yet deliberate. "Here," he said simply, offering her a small smile. "Figured you could use this." Emily accepted the mug gratefully, cradling it between her hands, as if drawing comfort from its warmth. She took a tentative sip, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer now, less guarded than it had been the night before. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sounds being the occasional creak of the old trailer and the distant chirping of birds outside. But as the minutes ticked by, Emily began to open up, her words flowing hesitantly at first, but gaining momentum as she spoke. She talked about her life back home, about the sprawling mansion in Lake Forest, where she lived with her parents, the private school she attended, and the endless parties and charity events that filled her calendar. Yet beneath the polished surface of privilege lay a deep loneliness, one that Ethan recognized all too well. Her father, Richard Parker, was a billionaire businessman who spent most of his time in meetings or traveling for work, leaving Emily to navigate her teenage years largely on her own. Her mother, though present, was more concerned with maintaining their family's social status than connecting with her daughter on a personal level. "It's like, I'm just another accessory to them," Emily admitted, her voice breaking slightly, "a trophy to show off when it suits them." Ethan listened intently, his heart aching for the girl sitting across from him. Though their circumstances were vastly different, he understood what it meant to feel unseen, to carry burdens no one else could see. He thought of Lily, asleep in the next room, and how fiercely he tried to shield her from the harsh realities of life despite their struggles. As Emily continued speaking, Ethan found himself sharing bits of his own story, how he had lost his wife to illness years ago, leaving him to raise Lily alone, how he worked long hours at the warehouse just to keep a roof over their heads, and how sometimes, late at night, he wondered if he was doing enough for his daughter. There was a raw honesty in his words, a vulnerability that resonated deeply with Emily. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on him, as if seeing him for the first time. "You're a good dad," she said suddenly, her tone firm despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "Lily's lucky to have you." The compliment caught Ethan off guard, and for a brief moment, he felt a lump rise in his throat. No one had ever called him a good dad before, not when he spent so much time questioning himself. As the morning wore on, Emily grew more comfortable in their modest home, even helping Ethan prepare breakfast, a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast that somehow tasted better than usual. Lily woke up shortly afterward, her sleepy face lighting up when she saw Emily sitting at the table. "Who are you?" she asked innocently, plopping down beside her. Emily chuckled, introducing herself and explaining that she had stayed the night because of the storm. To Ethan's surprise, the two girls hit it off almost immediately, bonding over silly jokes and shared stories. Emily showed Lily how to braid her hair, while Lily proudly displayed her collection of drawings pinned to the fridge. Watching them laugh together, Ethan felt a pang of nostalgia, reminded of simpler times when joy came easily, without strings attached. For the first time in what felt like forever, the trailer felt alive with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness that usually lingered in its corners. But as the day progressed, an undercurrent of tension began to creep back into the air. Emily's phone, which had been silent all morning, suddenly buzzed with a flurry of notifications. She glanced at the screen, her smile faltering as she scrolled through dozens of missed calls and messages. "They've noticed I'm gone," she muttered under her breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she set the phone down. Ethan watched her carefully, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Your parents?" he asked gently, though he already knew the answer. Emily nodded, biting her lip. "They're probably freaking out," she admitted, her voice tinged with both guilt and defiance. "There's probably reporters everywhere by now." Ethan frowned, realizing the gravity of the situation. Running away might have seemed like a reckless act of rebellion to Emily, but to her parents and the rest of the world it was a scandal waiting to unfold. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand why she had chosen his trailer, of all places to seek refuge, but something held him back. Instead, he focused on reassuring her, reminding her that she wasn't alone. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly, his tone steady, despite the unease building inside him. By mid-afternoon, the storm outside had fully subsided, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the trailer feel smaller than ever. Emily grew quieter, retreating into herself as the reality of her situation sank in. She paced the living room occasionally, glancing at her phone but never answering the calls. Ethan tried to distract her by involving her in household chores, asking her to help fold laundry or organize Lily's toys. It was during one of these moments that Lily innocently asked, "Are you rich?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unexpected, causing Emily to freeze mid. She looked at the little girl, then at Ethan, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I guess so," she replied hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it doesn't make me happy." The admission was raw and unfiltered, cutting through the tension like a knife. Ethan met her gaze, seeing the truth in her words, and nodded silently. Money couldn't buy love or connection, and they both knew it. As evening approached, the atmosphere grew heavier, the suspense palpable. Emily's phone buzzed incessantly, each notification a reminder of the world outside closing in on them. Ethan debated whether to encourage her to reach out to her parents, knowing it was the right thing to do, but part of him feared what might happen if he did. What if they blamed him for harboring her? What if they saw him as some kind of threat? The uncertainty gnawed at him, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Emily picked up her phone and dialed a number, her hands shaking violently. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking, as tears streamed down her face. Whatever was said on the other end of the line remained unclear, but Ethan could see the relief wash over Emily's features, followed quickly by a wave of apprehension. She ended the call abruptly, turning to Ethan with wide, fearful eyes. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They'll be here soon." The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Ethan's trailer as the first sound of an approaching vehicle broke the evening silence. The crunch of tires on gravel sent a jolt of unease through him, and he instinctively moved to the window, pulling back the edge of the curtain just enough to peer outside. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the trailer, its polished surface gleaming even in the dim light. Behind it, another car arrived, this one filled with reporters clutching cameras and microphones, their flashes already illuminating the darkening sky like lightning strikes. Ethan's stomach tightened as he watched two men step out of the SUV, tall and imposing in a tailored suit, the other shorter but equally authoritative, flanked by security guards who scanned the area with sharp, calculating eyes. This was no ordinary visit. It was a spectacle, a scene straight out of a movie Ethan never thought he'd star in. He turned to Emily, who stood frozen near the couch, her face pale and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Is that," he began, his voice trailing off as she nodded silently, confirming what he already suspected. The man in the suit was Richard Parker, Emily's father, and judging by the entourage accompanying him, he wasn't here for a casual chat. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. He glanced at Lily, who was peeking, curiously, from behind the kitchen counter, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and fascination at the commotion outside. "Stay here," he whispered firmly, giving her a reassuring smile, before stepping toward the door. As he opened it, the cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint hum of camera shutters clicking furiously. Richard Parker strode forward, his presence commanding and overwhelming, while the reporters shouted questions that blended into a chaotic din. Ethan raised a hand to shield his eyes from the blinding flashes, feeling more exposed than he ever had in his life. "Mr. Carter," Richard asked, his tone clipped but not unkind, his piercing gaze sweeping over Ethan's worn clothes and the modest interior of the trailer visible behind him. "I'm Richard Parker. My daughter, she's here, isn't she?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding, stepping aside to allow the man entry. The contrast between Richard's polished demeanor and the shabby surroundings couldn't have been starker. Yet there was something undeniably human about the desperation etched into his face. It was clear he hadn't slept much since Emily disappeared, his usually immaculate appearance marred by faint stubble and dark circles under his eyes. As Richard entered the trailer, followed closely by one of the guards, Emily emerged from the living room, her steps hesitant but resolute. For a moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Then, without warning, Richard closed the distance between them, pulling Emily into a tight embrace that seemed to convey months' worth of pent-up emotions. "You scared me half to death," he murmured, his voice thick with relief and frustration. Emily didn't respond immediately, her body stiffening at first, before finally relaxing into his arms. When she pulled away, tears streamed down her cheeks, but her expression was defiant. "I needed to get away," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I couldn't breathe anymore." Richard sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair as if searching for the right words. "We'll talk about this later," he promised, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced they would resolve anything anytime soon. Turning back to Ethan, he extended a hand, his gratitude evident despite the awkwardness of the situation. "Thank you for taking care of her," he said sincerely. "I can't tell you how much it means to know she was safe." Ethan shook the man's hand, feeling a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. He didn't want praise or recognition. He had done what anyone decent would have done. Still, Richard's words carried weight, and Ethan found himself nodding, slowly, unsure of how to respond. Before he could say anything, Richard gestured to one of the guards, who handed him an envelope. "Please," Richard insisted, his tone leaving little room for argument. "Take this as a token of our appreciation. You've done us a great service." Ethan hesitated, glancing at the envelope warily. He didn't need to open it to know it contained far more money than he made in a year, maybe even several years. But accepting it felt wrong, like taking charity for something he hadn't asked for. "I appreciate the gesture," he said carefully, pushing the envelope back toward Richard. "But I didn't do this for payment. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Richard studied him for a moment, his expression softening further. "That makes you a rare kind of person, Mr. Carter," he replied, his voice tinged with admiration. "But please, let me help in some way. You've given me my daughter back." The tension in the room shifted subtly as Emily stepped forward, her eyes darting between her father and Ethan. "Dad, stop," she pleaded, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "He doesn't want your money. What he did it wasn't about that." Her words hung in the air, punctuated by the distant murmur of reporters still gathered outside. Richard looked at his daughter, then at Ethan, and something passed between them, a mutual understanding born of shared humanity rather than wealth or privilege. Finally, Richard nodded, signaling the guard to put the envelope away. "All right," he conceded, though his tone suggested he wouldn't forget Ethan's kindness so easily. "But I hope you'll allow me to repay you in other ways. Perhaps we can discuss it further another time." Ethan agreed reluctantly, sensing that this encounter was far from over. As Emily hugged both him and Lily goodbye, her tears flowing freely now, Ethan felt a pang of sadness, mixed with relief. She was going home, where she belonged. But part of him wondered if she truly understood the complexity of the world she was returning to. Once the Parkers left, the reporters dispersing reluctantly after being told there would be no statement, the trailer fell eerily silent. Ethan sank onto the couch, his mind racing with everything that had just transpired. Who was he to judge someone like Richard Parker? The man may have been wealthy beyond measure, but he clearly loved his daughter, and the pain of losing her even temporarily had been written all over his face. Yet, As Ethan sat there, staring at the empty space where Emily had stood moments earlier, he couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were now intertwined in ways neither of them fully understood. A week later, an envelope arrived in the mail containing tickets to a high-profile charity gala hosted by the Parkers. Confused but intrigued, Ethan debated whether to attend, weighing the pros and cons of stepping into a world so vastly different from his own. In the end, curiosity won out, driven by a desire to see Emily again and perhaps gain closure on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. Little did he know, the gala would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one that blurred the lines between privilege and humility, gratitude and obligation, and ultimately forced him to confront truths about himself he hadn't been ready to face. The night of the charity gala arrived, and Ethan stood outside the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton Hotel, feeling as out of place as a puzzle piece from an entirely different set. His rented suit was slightly too tight around the shoulders, and the polished shoes pinched his feet with every step he took. The opulent surroundings, the glittering chandeliers, the marble floors, the sea of elegantly dressed guests, felt like something out of a dream he hadn't asked to enter. He clutched the envelope containing his invitation tightly, half expecting someone to approach him and ask what he was doing there. Yet, as he scanned the crowd, he spotted Emily immediately. She looked radiant, in a flowing silver gown, her blonde hair styled perfectly. But there was a nervous energy about her that reminded him of the girl who had sat shivering on his couch just weeks earlier. Before he could fully process his surroundings, she caught sight of him and rushed over, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "Ethan," she exclaimed, pulling him into an unexpected hug. "I'm so glad you came." Her warmth was infectious, easing some of the tension coiled in his chest. And for a moment, he allowed himself to relax. Emily introduced him to her father, Richard Parker, who greeted him with a firm handshake and a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Despite his tailored suit and commanding presence, Richard seemed more subdued tonight, the weight of recent events still lingering beneath his polished exterior. He thanked Ethan once again for taking care of Emily, though this time, his gratitude felt less formal and more personal. "You have no idea how much it means to me and to Emily that you were there when we weren't," Richard said, his voice tinged with regret. Ethan nodded awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone whose life seemed so far removed from his own. As they spoke, Emily interjected frequently, sharing anecdotes about how Ethan's kindness had impacted her during her brief stay at his trailer. Her words painted a vivid picture of their unlikely bond, one rooted in simplicity and mutual understanding, rather than wealth or privilege. It was clear she admired Ethan deeply, and her enthusiasm bridged the gap between the two men, creating an unspoken connection neither had anticipated. As the evening progressed, Ethan found himself drawn into conversations with people whose lives revolved around numbers and influence, topics he knew little about. They spoke of mergers, philanthropy, and global initiatives, their words flowing effortlessly, while Ethan struggled to keep up. At one point, a woman in a sequined dress turned to him and asked what he did for a living. When he mentioned his job at the warehouse, her expression shifted ever so slightly, though she quickly masked it with a polite nod. Ethan braced himself for judgment, but instead, she leaned in and said, "It must be rewarding, knowing you're contributing to something tangible." Her comment caught him off guard, forcing him to reconsider his own perspective on work and purpose. For years, he had viewed his job as merely a means to survive, but now, standing amidst individuals whose achievements often felt intangible, he realized there was value in the simplicity of hard, honest labor. The realization struck him unexpectedly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, and he found himself smiling despite the initial discomfort. Meanwhile, Emily remained by his side throughout the evening, acting as both guide and advocate. She introduced him to friends, colleagues, and even a few celebrities who wandered past, each interaction adding another layer of surrealism to the experience. But it was during a quiet moment near the balcony that Emily revealed why she had insisted Ethan attend. "I wanted you to see this world not because I think it's better," she explained softly, "but because I want you to understand where I come from, man. Maybe we can find a way to bring these worlds closer together." Her words resonated deeply with Ethan, who had spent much of his life believing that certain barriers were insurmountable. Yet here was Emily, determined to prove otherwise, driven by a desire to bridge the gap between privilege and humility. Her sincerity was disarming, and for the first time, Ethan began to see the gala, not as an alien environment, but as an opportunity, a chance to challenge his assumptions and embrace the complexity of human connection. Richard joined them shortly afterward, his demeanor warmer now, as he proposed an idea that would change everything. "Ethan," he began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, that you didn't help Emily for reward. That speaks volumes about your character. So, let me offer something meaningful, instead of monetary compensation." He paused, gauging Ethan's reaction before continuing. "My foundation runs scholarships for underprivileged children. I'd like to fund Lily's education through that program, not as charity, but as an investment in her future." The offer hung in the air, heavy with implications. Ethan's mind raced, torn between pride and reluctance. Accepting such generosity felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that he couldn't provide for his daughter on his own. But Emily intervened gently, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Accepting help isn't weakness, Ethan," she said softly. "It's strength. You taught me that." Her words struck a chord within him, reminding him of the lessons he had unknowingly imparted during their brief time together. Slowly, he nodded, meeting Richard's gaze with newfound respect. "If it's truly an investment," he replied carefully, "then I accept. But only if Lily has a say in it too." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and fleeting introductions. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the sense that something profound had shifted within him. By the time he returned home late that night, his mind was buzzing with thoughts of possibilities and responsibilities. Lily, who had stayed with a neighbor, greeted him eagerly, her youthful exuberance grounding him in the familiarity of their modest trailer. As he tucked her into bed, he realized that the decisions made tonight weren't just about securing a brighter future. They were about redefining what family meant in a world that often prioritized material wealth over emotional bonds. The memory of Emily's hopeful smile lingered in his mind, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. And as sleep finally claimed him, Ethan dreamed not of luxury or privilege, but of bridges being built one heartfelt gesture at a time. Months had passed since the charity gala, and Ethan's life had begun to change in ways he never imagined. The scholarship for Lily was finalized, giving her access to opportunities that once seemed out of reach. But it wasn't just about the money, it was the ripple effect of connection that truly transformed their world. Emily had stayed in touch, visiting occasionally with her father or sending letters filled with updates about her life. Each visit brought a mix of excitement and nervousness. Ethan still felt like an outsider stepping into a realm far removed from his own. Yet Emily's genuine affection and Richard's growing respect made the transition easier. One sunny Saturday morning, they received an invitation to spend the weekend at the Parker Estate in Lake Forester, sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and towering oak trees. Ethan hesitated before accepting, unsure if he could navigate the complexities of such luxury without feeling out of place. But when Lily bounced around the trailer, squealing with delight at the idea of seeing Emily again, Ethan knew there was no turning back. They packed lightly, bringing only what they needed, and drove the 2 hours to the estate, the anticipation building with every mile. When they arrived, the grandeur of the property took Ethan's breath away. The mansion loomed ahead, its white columns gleaming under the midday sun, while fountains sparkled in the distance. A uniformed staff member greeted them at the gate, guiding their old sedan along a winding driveway lined with roses. Ethan felt a pang of self-consciousness as he parked beside rows of luxury cars. But any discomfort melted away the moment Emily appeared at the front door, waving enthusiastically. She ran down the steps to meet them, hugging Lily tightly before turning to Ethan with a warm smile. "Welcome," she said simply, her eyes shining with gratitude. As they entered the house, Ethan marveled at the opulence, the crystal chandeliers, the plush carpets, the artwork adorning the walls, but what struck him most was how empty it all felt. Despite its beauty, the mansion lacked the warmth of home, a stark contrast to the cozy chaos of his trailer. Emily seemed to notice his reaction and whispered, "It's nice, isn't it? But it doesn't feel real." Her words lingered in his mind as they explored the grounds together, laughter filling the air as Lily chased after butterflies in the garden. That evening, Richard hosted a small dinner on the terrace, the setting sun casting golden hues over the landscape. He spoke openly about the changes in his relationship with Emily, crediting Ethan's influence for helping him see the importance of presence over perfection. "You reminded me that being a father isn't about providing everything," Richard admitted, raising his glass in a toast. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. The sentiment resonated deeply with Ethan, who had spent years questioning whether he was doing enough for Lily. For the first time, he realized that love didn't have to be measured in material terms. It was about effort, consistency, and the willingness to grow alongside your child. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted to dreams and aspirations. Emily shared her plans to study social work, inspired by the kindness she had witnessed during her brief stay with Ethan. "I want to help people find strength in difficult times," she explained, her voice filled with determination. Lily chimed in excitedly, talking about her newfound interest in art thanks to the resources provided by the scholarship. Watching them interact, Ethan felt a surge of pride, not because of what they were achieving, but because of who they were becoming. The next morning, Ethan woke early, drawn outside by the peaceful quiet of dawn. He wandered through the gardens, sipping coffee from a delicate porcelain cup, until he found himself standing near a pond, where Emily sat sketching in a notebook. She looked up as he approached, patting the bench beside her. "Do you ever think about how much one decision can change everything?" she asked thoughtfully, gesturing toward the mansion behind them. Ethan nodded slowly, reflecting on the chain of events that had led them here from the stormy night. She showed up on his doorstep to the bond they now shared. "Sometimes I wonder," he admitted, "if I'd have done anything differently, if I'd known who you were from the start." Emily smiled softly, shaking her head. "It wouldn't have mattered. You helped me because it was the right thing to do, not because of my last name. That's why it meant so much." Her words reinforced the truth Ethan had come to embrace. True wealth wasn't found in bank accounts or estates, but in relationships built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. Later that day, as they prepared to leave, Richard handed Ethan a small envelope containing tickets to another upcoming event. "Consider it a thank you," he said warmly, his tone leaving little room for refusal. This time, Ethan accepted without hesitation, recognizing that these gatherings weren't just obligations, they were opportunities to expand his perspective and strengthen the ties between their two families. On the drive home, Lily chatted happily about everything she had experienced, her excitement infectious. Ethan listened quietly, his thoughts drifting to the future. Life hadn't become easier overnight. Bills still needed paying, and challenges remained. But something fundamental had shifted. He no longer saw himself as merely surviving. Instead, he felt like he was thriving, buoyed by the knowledge that he wasn't alone in this journey. The bond he shared with Emily and her family had opened doors he never knew existed, proving that acts of kindness could create ripples extending far beyond their origin. Weeks turned into months, and the Carters' lives continued to evolve. Lily thrived in her new school, her confidence blossoming as she discovered talents she hadn't known she possessed. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself invited to more events hosted by Richard's Foundation, where he shared his story with others, facing similar struggles. His message was simple yet powerful. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, a meal, a listening ear, a safe place to sleep, could make the biggest difference. Emily remained a constant presence in their lives, acting as both mentor and friend to Lily, while deepening her friendship with Ethan. Together, they proved that backgrounds didn't define relationships. Shared values and mutual respect did. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ethan watched Lily and Emily toss leaves into the air, laughing until their sides hurt, he realized how far they'd come since that rainy night. Their worlds may have been different, but their hearts beat to the same rhythm, one of hope, resilience, and unwavering belief in the power of human connection. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan knew they were just beginning to write the next chapter of their intertwined stories.